Many signs point to imminent, bigger than LEHMAN financial tsunami. Veteran financial market observers will tell you that anomalies in financial markets last week point to some sort of black swan event on the horizon. This could be, cross your fingers and knock on wood, the signs of a long-awaited implosion of the US corporate government. It could also be the signal for a new Bretton Woods-style reboot of the world's financial system. To understand, take a look at these two graphs from September 19. The first is the repo market. The second is the SOFR, Secured Overnight Financing Rate, the replacement for LIBOR. The repo market is basically a market where banks use long-term high-quality financial instruments like US government bonds as collateral to borrow here-and-now cash. The second is the rate at which banks lend to each other. The jump from 2% to 10% in repo market in a single day either means insiders think US bonds are about to become worthless, or else some huge bank is about to go bust, and so nobody wants to hand another cash over to them. The second, SOFR, moved 282 basic points in a market where people typically freak out over a move of even 20 basic points. The SOFR, at the very least, indicates that a mega bank or several mega banks could not get money from other banks. This sort of move was last seen at the time of Lehman shock. The privately owned Fed has been trying to calm things out by offering to dish out $75 billion per day between now and October 10th. That's interesting timing, because the US corporate government has a payment deadline on September 30. It will be giving until around October 10th, or the 17th at the latest, to come up with the money if it failed to pay up on September 30. A British royal family member explained, the financial industry has been bankrupted by a decision by the US judiciary to allow class action suits against them. The volatility is just an aftershock of that, he explained. The links below show that many banks, including JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, Barclays, Bank of New York Mellon, Society General, Commerzbank, and others are now being treated as organized crime gangs and being hit with RICO and other anti-gang laws. Needless to say, these criminal cases will lead to bank-busting lawsuits by the victims of these financial misdeeds. These legal moves are not the only sign the financial system is collapsing. A look at the US loan markets reveals that a complete disaster has already begun. There are now $3,128 trillion worth of high-risk loans or bonds to either subprime real estate or iffy corporations. That's almost double the amount seen just before Lehman shock. Also, US private sector financial assets are now 5.6 times US GDP, meaning they would have to fall close to 80% to be equal to GDP. Remember, this does not include the over $200 trillion, 10 times GDP in unfunded liabilities the US government has. One more shocker, the US government-owned housing finance companies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac has a total of $6 billion as a capital buffet, but own or guarantee almost $5 trillion in mortgage securities. That means they are leveraged over 100 to 1. In other words, if housing prices fall even 1.1%, they are bust. And guess what? Folks, there are signs housing prices have in fact started falling. No wonder finance guru Jim Rogers predicts the entire financial system will collapse within 3 or 2 years. He's probably an optimist. It may well be that, at the very least, widely overvalued, if not outright fraudulent real estate company WeWork may be the immediate trigger for the collapse. This is very interesting, because it brings us to Saudi Arabia and Japanese investor Masayoshi Son's $100 billion USD Vision Fund. The collapse of the WeWork may ultimately bankrupt Sun, and this in turn could lead to genuine regime change in Japan. Sun-owned Musashi Engineering, the company that helped steal Japanese elections in order to keep the criminal regime of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in power. Sun's main backer, Saudi Crown Prince actor Mohammed bin Salman, the real MBS is that, last week tried to approach the above-mentioned British lawyer to seek financial support. MBS made a request for direct contact, but since the request came from an unscreened source, it was declined, he says. So that is the background for sudden oil refinery fires last week in Saudi Arabia, Italy, India, China, Mexico. It seems the owners of the importing petrodollar system are saying, "Keep us going or we cut off your oil." Also, several Japanese sources tell us multiple threats, earthquake, nuclear bombs, are being made against Japan in order to force them to fork over more money to the US corporation. Then we have the Rockefeller-controlled World Bank and the World Health Organization indirectly threatening to kill 80 million people. In fact, Pentagon sources tell us the death of longtime Zimbabwe leader Robert Mugabe, sanctions on Iran's central bank, Saudi oil disruption, and the China trade war may speed up the timetable for US President Donald Trump to announce a return to the gold standard. If you are interested in details about Trump's plans for a gold standard, you can read this essay by Judy Shelton, whom Trump recently nominated as a Fed governor. The US military, meanwhile, is strengthening its hand in the Middle East in preparation for coming world changes. Our Pentagon sources report former Israeli Defense Forces Chief Benny Gantz may well be the next Prime Minister of Israel, whose party includes two other former IDF chiefs. This means Pentagon influence now officially extends from Saudi Arabia and Egypt to Israel, he adds. This will be good for Middle East peace, the source explains, because Gantz need the support of joint list Arab parties, and a paper tiger IDF is afraid of casualties against superior Russian and Iranian weapons, so this should deter any future aggressions. With Bibi deposed, anti-Sisi protests in Egypt and US troops to Saudi Arabia to protect MBS, Trump is reining in his three detectors to accept a new medias under Russia, China, Iran, and Turkey, the source further notes. The other thing the Pentagon source reported this week was that the three military industrial complex corporations were against the ropes with Lockheed F-35 dysfunctions, Boeing 737, 787, 777 troubles, and Raytheon Patriot missile defense craft. This is bad news for the Zionists and the deep state, but a good for peace in a multipolar world, he says. We also got a very interesting, if bizarre, report this week from the US-based CIA source that I decided to include verbatimly below because I have independently heard a lot of similar stuff from multiple high-level insiders. This comes from a source at the MJ level, and I consider it completely accurate. For Hillary to be prosecuted, the whole CIA would have to be dethroned, and the whole fake national security system, which was set up to provide covers for crimes used for raising black ops money, cover for many covered ops and sanctions, as well as personal enrichment of the top controllers, would have to be declared criminal and then be restricted by about 95%. The Clintons were CIA. Their case officer, GHWB, Hillary conceived an eyes wide shut occurred breeding ceremony supposed by a top Rothschild, and Bill, the illegitimate son of Nelson Rockefeller, conceived the same way, thus their great power. The CIA filed national security waivers to the US DOJ so that all evidence against Hillary and Bill and the Clinton foundations was protected under national security and could not be used to prosecute another. Hillary's email were a covert op against the Chinese, giving up emails and agent names, willing to get rid of them, in order to gain trust and to some incorrect misinformation to mislead the Chinese. Hillary was playing a double agent role to deceive the Chinese while helping to build them up, to later be parasited by the City of London private bankster. Right now, there is an internecine war among different groups at the top. Trump was drafted by the US and admirals. clearly represents the satanic pedophile network and is a satanic Moloch witch of a coven in California where she usually attends monthly occult ceremonies. The Pizzagate stories are all true and are connected to Epstein, NXIVM, and many more human compromised sex child trafficking and the child sacrifice occult system worldwide. The Bush-Turf Cable is part of the Nazi Fourth Reich, worshippers of the Black Sun, and run by the COL Zeals, relating to the various occult circles from the days of John Dee and Aleister Crowley, which merge British intel with entities from the dark side. The reason child sex trafficking and sacrifice is so important is that these criminals believe they must use this to compromise and control all major officials and corporate heads, while feeding the negative life force energy needs of Bayor and Moloch, in order to be suitably empowered to run the world and stay very wealthy. Some are addicted to the victim's blood and hormones. I believe that soon this whole cable bunch will be pushed aside by the Shabai, using Santorin rabies, and they will institute the Noahide laws. They are already supposed law in the USA. Ronald Reagan supposedly spearheaded it, perhaps a PDD, Presidential Decisions Directive. All visible existing economy and power structures, especially misery Babylon, the baby, which is the Vatican, COL, DC system based on the US petrodollar, will be pushed out of power. Here's what the top circle of 9 controllers have as their agenda right now: manipulate Russia and America to destroy each other, while the Zeals, Israel, and Islamic in the media destroy each other, and then China will become the world's premier power, take over the media after they complete the Belt and Road system, which will be the biggest economic developments since World War II in America. Meanwhile, the CIA sources in East Asia sent the following. I was told last night by one of my very good contacts that a major false flag event has been planned for some time now. And yes, Australia is involved, as the event is scheduled to take place near Australia. PM Scott Morrison went to see Trump for much more than a nice state dinner. He's there until 27 September. Could this be when the events occur, while the PM is out of Australia? Australia was the first test bed, so to say, for NWO laws and various social engineering projects. This is raw intel, folks, so take it with a grain of salt, but the sources are real, and there can be no doubt something big is coming our way. The US military needs to arrest 120,000 people named in seal indictments ASAP and take them to the FEMA camps they built for us.